There's just endless number of things that cause frustration, and it's a powerful feeling. And when you feel helpless, what else do? You're going to have an anger response the rest of your life, and that anger will come up over and over again with that person who did you wrong. It's just the way it is. But what happens as you do the tools of just do mindfulness, relaxation, the writing exercises, etc., it's just a learned skill to actually substitute a different response. So we realize that this response is not very helpful, and you're going to simply substitute a different response. And with repetition, you're actually starting to change the physical structure of your brain. So now documented in neuroscience research that in chronic pain, your brain becomes cross-wired, and with repetition and reprogramming, you literally can change the response to your brain, and you physically change the structure of your brain.
The Vidal Speaks Podcast.
Episode 71, Dr. David Hanscom, Back in Control, a Surgeon's Roadmap Out of Chronic Pain. Welcome to Vidal Speaks. My name is Deborah Vidal, former 11-year LPGA golf pro turned classical homeopath, certified plant-based nutritionist, and wellness coach. Each week here on Vidal Speaks, we bring you knowledge, inspiration, or natural remedies to help you take charge of your health and feel your best. I believe health is freedom and knowledge is power, so tuning in each week will give you the power to take steps towards freeing yourself from the chains that hold you back from having the energy to do all you want in life. No matter where you are in your journey of wellness, Vidal Speaks can help. I promise. Hello, everyone. This is the Vidal Speaks podcast, and I'm Deborah Vidal, your host, and I'd like to welcome you back for another great episode. As I told you, the show is growing quite fast. Now, my goals are high, so nothing's fast enough, because you guys know I want to reach 1 million, but it's growing fast in the podcast world, so I just want to welcome all of you out there that just found the show in the last month. I hope you're finding it helpful and interesting. We all know people who are sick and have succumbed to the standard treatment of chronic disease, which is using pharmaceutical drugs to suppress symptoms. Sadly, that is far from the answer on how we can heal from chronic disease. Drugs can be miracles in acute emergencies or in some other situations, but too many people are suffering from lifestyle diseases that are coming from their diet and lifestyle. That is always the first step in healing. The other situation where we see millions of people on drugs is for pain control. And I know you guys have heard me say this before and speak about the opioid addiction in many countries that's out of control. But in America, it's one of the biggest worries ever right now. Young kids in their teens are getting hooked on these. I personally knew a couple young 16-year-old kids who needed some kind of surgery, and they got put on pain pills after the surgery. And since that, their pain didn't get better, so they just became addicts. It ruined their family's life. It took one of them years to find his way out of that mess. And he's probably one of the lucky ones because many never make it out. But pain is a horrible thing. And after suffering from debilitating migraines for 40 years, you guys, I understand when someone says they want to commit suicide because they're living with chronic pain. I'm not saying it's the right thing, but I know what it feels like to feel trapped and like you have no way out in life. Thankfully, I never took opioids to manage my pain, and thankfully I found some other less harmful things to help me get through those hard times. But still, those times were horrible, and I feel for anyone with any kind of pain. Pain makes you focus only on your pain. It's as if you can't escape your thoughts for 1 minute to think of anything else. That's why it feels like a trap, because you can only think about how it's ruining your life. Eventually, you do feel trapped, and then you feel anxious and angry. And I was just thinking, it's probably not by chance that pain rhymes with insane, because that's how it makes you feel often. Well, I can't wait for you to meet my guest today, Dr. David Hanscom, because not only is he one of our country's renowned spinal surgeons, who, by the way, specializes in complicated spinal surgeries, but he too had chronic pain and became suicidal over it. Actually, He was in the act of killing himself from carbon dioxide poisoning in his car when he turned the car off at the last moment, just because he felt so bad to leave his son behind without a father. So Dr. Hanscom knows about pain in every way you can imagine. He does surgeries on people that are told by other doctors that they just have to learn to live with their pain or get used to it. But he not only doesn't tell that to his patients, he is now many times canceling their surgeries because they have tried his method that he used to heal his own pain, and now all their pain goes away before the surgery. So how's that? I'm so excited about this episode, you guys. Dr. David Hanscom is like an amazing spinal surgeon that has been transformed by being humbled with his own pain and forced to look deeper inside at his own emotions that were out of balance. He healed himself completely, and he says as long as he continues to do his protocol, he is pain-free. And is not just a fluke, because thousands of patients are getting off their meds, avoiding surgeries, and are now pain-free. It's truly amazing. Almost like combining the best surgeon with the Zen Buddhist master, and you get something profound. Well, that's what I think of Dr. David Hanscom. Okay, I know I have you all on the edge of your seat wondering, what is his method? Well, you'll hear him talk about it, and it entails a few things. One part is learning to be mindful, and he speaks about that. But one of the most important and unique parts is that he has patients write down on a piece of paper twice a day for 15 minutes anything that comes into their head. So for 15 minutes, they just write whatever's on their mind. And when they're done, they have to tear it up and throw it away. He says, be sure to tear it up and throw it away. I know many of you out there are saying, yeah, right. Well, that's what he said until his pain started going away. And that's what most people say. But let me tell you a story, because it's how I also discovered Dr. Hanscom. I heard this guy speak who had to have a back fusion from neck to lumbar. He broke it in 5 places in a horrible accident on a horse. 1 year after his fusion, he was still in so much pain he was on the edge of suicide. And before he killed himself, he went to a surgeon to see if there was anything they could do. The surgeon offered him to take out his entire fusion and redo it. It would be a 2-year recovery. And honestly, the patient just said, no, I think I'd rather commit suicide. I can't go through that again. And his friend knew of Dr. Hanscom or had heard of him and said, just get a second opinion, because this is a doctor who can help people with many failed surgeries. So he did. And Dr. David looked at his x-rays, and then he said to the guy, nope, your fusion is perfect and it's not causing your pain. And you can imagine what the guy said. What? Then what is? And he began to explain his technique and told the guy to go back to his hotel and write for 15 minutes that night and then tear it up. He did, and when the guy woke in the morning, he said he was like 75% better, and he couldn't even believe it himself. And after a few months, he became pain-free, and he continues to be today. So now, if that isn't a good testimonial, then I don't know what is. But Dr. Hanscom has hundreds of patients like this that have canceled their surgeries and are pain-free. You will hear him talk about why the writing is so powerful. And I highly recommend that if you or anyone you know has pain, to please buy his book. It's called Back in Control. I have Lloyd reading it right now, and even Lloyd said today, I think although I don't understand this stuff so well, I believe this will help me. Most people have no idea how emotions affect our nervous system and all the things that they can cause to create chronic conditions. Okay, you guys, I'm going to stop now because I want you to meet Dr. Hanscom and hear him tell you all about it. But first, let me tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Hanscom is a board-certified orthopedic surgeon specializing in complex spine problems in all areas of the spine. He has expertise in adult and pediatric spinal deformities such as scoliosis and kyphosis. A significant part of his practice is devoted to performing surgery on patients who have had multiple prior surgeries. He works for Swedish Neuroscience Specialists in Seattle, Washington. His bio is very extensive, so please go to his website and check it out in more detail, along with so many other cool articles there. But let me tell you a little bit more about his training. He got his medical degree from Loma Linda University in 1979. Residency training was in internal medicine in Spokane, Washington. Orthopedic residency was at the University of Hawaii. Orthopedic trauma fellowship was at UC Davis in Sacramento. And spinal deformity fellowship was completed in Minneapolis. Anyways, you really need to go to his website because he has so many great articles, but I want to tell you a few of the really neat ones. One is called The Cry of Chronic Pain. Another one is A Surgeon's Perspective on the Hoffman Process and Physician Suicide. My Journey is another one. And Aching Back, Why Surgery is Not Indicated for Your Low Back Pain. So check those out. They're really, really interesting. They're not the usual article like you would expect. He's the founder of the Puget Sound Spine Society, which was formed in 1987. It's a nonprofit educational group which provides a regional forum for physicians to share ideas regarding optimum spine care. He's the author of his book called Back in Control, A Surgeon's Roadmap Out of Chronic Pain. And I highly recommend you read this because he explains in full detail why his method works and what you need to do to get out of chronic pain or chronic anxiety. This book will be a miracle to many and already has been, so I'm thrilled I got to have him on the show today. Okay, without any further delay, let's go talk to Dr. Hanscom and hear about his theory, okay? Hi, Dr. Hanscom. I'm so honored to have you on my show, really. I look so forward to sharing your story and work with all my listeners because it's truly amazing. And I know for many it's going to be unbelievable, but thanks for giving me the honor to dig deep into what you do. And welcome to the Vidal Speaks podcast.
Thanks. No, I'm excited to be here and honored to be asked.
Cool. So, okay, you're an orthopedic spine surgeon. That's a surgeon that's close to my heart, as you know, with all my back stuff. But I want to say that I'm assuming anyway, and from reading, that you were trained in a very traditional way. And for many years of your life as a surgeon, you did things as many other surgeons do. And then something changed because you're at this place where you still do surgery, and I'm sure you still do quite a bit of it, but you've been through such a process that you now have a way to teach your patients how to possibly get out of pain and not need a surgery. And it feels like I'm telling my listeners about a book, and I told them about chapter 1 and chapter 43, but there's a big piece in the middle missing, which I think is what you're going to tell us today, and that's your story. So give us a little bit about your training, and then I want to hear your progression of where you got to where you are today.
I went to medical school at Loma Linda University in Southern California, and I graduated there in around 1979. Then I did orthopedics in Hawaii until 1984. Then I did a spinal deformity fellowship in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1985-86. That's considered one of the top spine fellowships in the world at the time. We did a lot of major deformity work. Dr. Mo was a pioneer of deformity surgery originally, and it was a very intense fellowship. And I came out of there with a zeal that I could cure anything with surgery. About the time I went from Minneapolis to Seattle in 1986, there was a plate, a lumbar spine plate called a Steffi plate that allowed us to put bolts right into the spine, and we had a much, much higher chance of obtaining a solid fusion, whereas before that we just placed in bone graft, and maybe it healed, maybe it didn't. So I became a zealot, and we did 9 times the rate of spine surgery as any place in the entire country for about 5 or 6 years, and I was part of that juggernaut. So I did surgery after surgery after surgery for back pain, and they weren't working very well, but I didn't understand why. I would ask people what the data was, and they said, well, we don't really know, we just know we're getting a solid fusion. So I was really a firm believer, very zealous, and in 1993 a paper came out that in the state of Washington, that the success rate for a spine fusion for back pain was 15% at 1-year follow-up, and at 2-year follow-up it was a 22% success rate. So I just stopped. I go, this is not working. And so I just stopped doing fusions for back pain. My
Wow.
success rate was about 40% because I worked a little bit harder in rehab, but in general, it just wasn't working very well. And at the same time, I went into this horrible burnout. About the same time, I developed chronic pain myself for about 15 years. So it's a combination of seeing surgery not work and jumping into my own chronic pain syndrome is how this book evolved.
And I'd like to know more about your chronic pain. Do you mind telling us what kind of pain it was? And did you have any idea where it was coming from? Like, were doctors able to help you?
No, I mean, what happens with chronic pain, basically it's a neurological disorder where if you look at these pain impulses coming into your body while your brain memorizes them just like an athlete, and obviously you're a very high level athlete, and so you understand repetition, the problem with pain impulses is they come in so quickly that the brain memorizes them in about 3 to 6 months. Once they are in there, it's like riding a bicycle. You actually cannot unlearn how to ride a bicycle. So what happens, your brain has these pathways fired up, and your body's trapped by these impulses. Then your body's full of adrenaline, and there's over 30 symptoms that occur with a consistently adrenalized nervous system. So I actually had 17 of these 30 symptoms at the same time. And so my list included migraine headaches. I had burning in my feet. I had these migratory skin rashes popping up all over my body. I had extreme anxiety, insomnia, obsessive thought patterns. I developed a full-blown obsessive compulsive disorder. I had neck pain. I had back pain. I had ringing in my ears, tinnitus. And it was unbelievable. And I had no idea what happened. And it started really badly in 1988, where I simply started to sweat during surgery. And I didn't know what that was. I never had that happen before. Then in 1990, I was crossing a bridge in Seattle about 10 o'clock at night and developed a full-blown panic attack. And I had no idea what that was. And I honestly
Wow.
did not know what anxiety was until that moment. I was so excellent at suppressing anxiety, I didn't even know what it was. I didn't have a clue. So I went from having no anxiety to panic attacks. And the next 13 years were just a disaster. It was horrible.
Wow. So the anxiety came kind of after the chronic pain syndrome, and you had all these pains, like pain in your back and pain in your neck. Had you at that point seen doctors, and did you do any surgeries, or did you take a bunch of medications and try to treat it the normal way that people do before they get off on this tangent of finding something that does work?
Well, let me back up just for a second. So what I know now, which I did not know on the first edition of my book, is that anxiety is the pain. In other words, what happens with your brain process, the way we survive on this planet is that your brain processes all sorts of sensory input, and then you act in a way to keep yourself safe. So and then what happens is that your body responds chemically and with a muscle action. So if you have loud sounds, bright lights, your body will secrete adrenaline and cortisol, then you feel anxiety. But when you feel anxiety, all you're doing is feeling that chemical surge. Same thing if you listen to a symphony, nice warm beat, sun, your body feels relaxed, but what you're feeling is the oxytocin, the dopamine, the Valium type drugs in your system. So again, feeling relaxed is just feeling that chemical surge. Human beings have a major problem in that thoughts have been shown in neuroscience research to go to the same area of the brain and give the same chemical response as the other physical sensations. The problem that humans have with thoughts compared to other living creatures is that we cannot escape our thoughts. So if you experience them, they get worse with repetition as you get older. If you suppress them, it's been shown in research they get even worse. And we all know that masking behavior works a little bit, but masking really doesn't work. We also know when you suppress thoughts, the research shows that you actually damage the hippocampus of your brain, which is the short-term and long-term memory center. So what happens, people get trapped by their thoughts. And so emotional pain and physical pain are equivalent entities.
Hmm.
And anxiety is not a psychological problem. It is a chemical response to sensory input, period, end of story. The reason why it's so critical to understand that is that the unconscious brain has been documented to be 1 million times stronger than the conscious brain. So you have this massive survival response with chemistry, motor functions, everything to do to protect you and keep you safe. And you try to deal with that with rational means. It's a 1,000,000 to 1 mismatch. So it's like trying to take down Mount Everest with a pickaxe. You have no chance of dealing with this. So when I was going through the middle of my burnout, and I'm really clear about this, I'm very public about this, is I was suicidal. I had no way of escaping these incredible thoughts. In 1997, I slipped into what's known as an obsessive compulsive disorder, which is characterized by extreme, vivid thoughts, they call them intrusive thoughts, that you can't escape. And they are just horrible. They don't stop. So then your body's really adrenalized, then you're trapped by these things, then you become really frustrated. I'll use the word angry, which really cranks up your body's adrenaline. And there's a period of time where my feet felt like they were in a toaster oven. It was horrible.
Wow.
And so I'm fine. I mean, I came out of this by accident literally in 2003, and I've been really just fine for about 10 years. And it took me a while to figure out what happened, how I got into chronic pain. It took me a while to figure out how I came out of it. And around 2006, I started sharing these strategies with my patients. And we've watched hundreds of patients go absolutely pain-free. So the process is not about managing chronic pain, it's about solving chronic pain. So it turns out that chronic pain is actually curable by using a self-directed, structured approach, period. And so again, the emotional pain and physical pain are equivalent entities. The most rewarding part of the process for me, both personally and with my patients, is people's anxiety drops through the floor. Because again, anxiety actually is the pain.
So there's so many places I want to go here, and we have so much to talk about, and I'm looking forward to having you come back on the show because I want to dig deeply into all of these things that you were just talking about. So, but do you believe that, let's say a person isn't outwardly aware that they're anxious, do you still believe that their pain syndrome is based on anxiety?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, to stay alive, I have a friend of mine, Fred Luskin, who wrote a book called Forgive for Good. He's brilliant. And it's when his book came into the practice years ago, people started going to pain-free. But Fred's point was that the human body is designed only to survive. That's it. It is not designed to have a good time. The only reason we have a social nature to us because as we evolved, the species that could get along with each other and cooperate survived. And so we have a social part to us, but the basic human structure is built to survive. So that's exactly what happened to me. I was raised in a very abusive household. It was very chaotic. And at age 15 years old, I decided enough of this. And I literally shut the door in my life and moved forward. And I became smart, athletic, personable, all this stuff that, quote, you're supposed to be successful. And I did it. So I actually did not experience the emotional anxiety. In fact, when I was 28 years old, I was on the orthopedic service in Hawaii, and a person came in with chronic back pain and anxiety. I had to go to the textbook to look up the word anxiety because I didn't know what it was. I honestly did not know what it was. And so it wasn't until I had that panic attack around age 38 or 39 that all of a sudden I was exposed to this. I still didn't know what it was. So the problem is the body doesn't lie. In other words, even though I wasn't experiencing anxiety, I was having burning in my feet, my ears were ringing, these little skin rashes were popping up, I wasn't sleeping very well, I was always frustrated, which you'll see in the book that anxiety and anger are essentially the same thing. And so I had all the physical symptoms, but I had no idea that I had anxiety. So I think that's a classic pattern that gets people in big trouble is that nobody likes anxiety. It's a feeling of being vulnerable and helpless, which our entire existence revolves around avoiding that feeling. It's the deepest feeling you want to avoid. And the way I masked it in retrospect is that I was angry. Now, I didn't know I had anger either. I just thought I was, quote, right, or frustrated, or I had a right to be frustrated, so that was it. But what happens is that anger is a feeling of being powerful, which actually covers up the feeling of being anxious. So probably the most common mechanism I think that people cover up the feeling of anxiety is, there's lots of ways of doing it, but my main way in retrospect was just being frustrated or really angry and agitated all the time. But since it was my baseline state, I didn't know what that was either. And in 2003, I was having full-blown panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorder. I mean, it was just a nightmare for years. And in 2002, I happened to pick up a book called Feeling Good by David Burns. And David Burns said to start writing things down. So I did. And within about 2 to 4 weeks, things started to change. And at the time, I thought it was the book, but it's actually the writing. I mean, it's a great book, too. But it was the writing exercises that started to break up these circuits. And then about 6 months later, I had to acknowledge the fact I was going through a bad divorce myself. And the anger issues finally came to the surface. I did not do it well, I'm sad to say. But about 6 weeks after I sort of muddled through the anger issues, my symptoms started to disappear. And 6 months later, I was fine. It wasn't until 2011 that Dr. Schubner out of Detroit gave a lecture at a course I put on that talked about what's called the mind-body syndrome. And he explained all these 30 symptoms of an adrenalized nervous system. And it was at that moment, all of a sudden it hit me what was going on. I did not put this together until Dr. Schubner's lecture. And all of a sudden it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Then I published my first book in 2012, about a year later.
Wow. So you look back and you say, when you're talking about you started writing after reading the book Feeling Good, you started writing and you started feeling like already some relief from writing things down on paper. And then as you progressed and you went through your divorce, you just continued writing, dealing with those issues of anger that you were becoming more aware of because the divorce probably brought your anger to the surface. So you were pretty clear that the writing was helping you to keep you at least on that path of continuing to write. And that is what you recommend to your patients mostly today. So I'd like to talk a little bit more of this, and then I want to get back into that idea of anger. But tell me a little bit from a doctor point of view and the nervous system and neurological system, how writing can help us. And maybe before we even go there, can you explain what the nervous system is so people get an idea?
Well, basically, your nervous system is just one big junction box. So you have receptors in your eyes, ears, nose, your skin. So I point out to my patients that, for instance, that the only reason you can see is because your eyes cannot see. Your eyes are just a grouping of receptors that send signals to the brain, and the brain has to unscramble the signals in order for you to see. So, for instance, people have a stroke in the back part of their brain called the occipital lobe, and they have what's called cortical blindness, where their eyes are working perfectly fine, but they cannot see. They're blind. So every sensory signal from the periphery has to be interpreted as positive, neutral, or negative. And if it's negative, then you avoid the sensation. If it's positive, you tend to gravitate towards it. And again, your body chemistry is generally you behave in a range most of the day where you don't feel positive or negative. For instance, right now as I've talked to you, I've probably shifted in my chair 20 times to even out the pressure on my skin so I don't break down my skin. But I wasn't conscious of any one of those moves. My brain is doing that for me. So your nervous system is flat out interprets all the sensory input. And again, the unconscious brain is a million times stronger than the conscious brain. Like, for instance, when I've been talking to you, I haven't had to think about moving my jaw muscles and my tongue in a way to make sounds because, again, my nervous system is doing all this for me. Same thing with pain impulses. Right now, I have my hands on this table and I'm sitting down, and I'm not avoiding that sensation because my brain is saying this is okay. But those pain thresholds change under stress. So when your body's under stress, your body's adrenaline and cortisol levels goes up. The animal studies have shown that increases the conduction of the nerves by 30 to 40%, and that's what it's supposed to do. When you're under stress, your body says danger, and you increase the conduction of the nerves to hypersensitize them and signal danger. So then what happens, you feel pain, you're trapped by it, and then your body now has more adrenaline and more sensitivity to the nerves. Then you actually feel even more pain, more frustration, more adrenaline. So you get this horrible cycle going.
So when you were talking about the anxiety and then the anger, you're kind of saying they're basically kind of the same thing. But I'm sure for some people, like I know in my practice, I had kids that came because they were aware they were very anxious. sometimes very anxious about their health, like almost hypochondriacal. And then there's people that come and they're not anxious at all. And they, like you, they would say, I don't even know what the word means. I don't have any connection to anxiety, but they're extremely angry, almost violent, like outwardly angry, expressing everything. So I'm very interested in how those two emotions are kind of seemingly like the same. Maybe what you're saying is they're the same because they do the same thing, but maybe you're also saying that they're both leaving us vulnerable. When we are anxious, we're vulnerable, and our anger is a compensation for feeling vulnerable. But I would like you to clarify that for me.
So going back to the conversation, again, the role of anxiety is to protect us. So without anxiety, we simply would not survive. If we didn't have any way of acting in a way to interpret sensations to protect ourselves, we would not survive. Mm-hmm. So the antidote to anxiety is control. You control your actions in a way to remain safe. When you lose control, then your anxiety goes up. And what happens is that your body kicks in adrenaline in an effort to regain control. So that's anger. So basically, anger is anxiety on adrenaline. It's really the exact same reaction.
I see. So anger is fueled by adrenaline then?
I'm happy to discuss this out loud because I've been thinking about this, is that basically anxiety is the fuel for anger. Then anger effectively covers up the feeling of anxiety, because what happens is anger feels powerful and anxiety feels vulnerable. And so we'll do anything to avoid the feeling of vulnerability. So we'll take action to control the situation causing anxiety. Then our anxiety is diminished. And then when our only resort is to become angry, it does effectively cover up anxiety. So that's probably the biggest block to treatment, is that feeling of anger, because people are simply not connected to anxiety, nor do they want to be. So I would say, I'm going to overstate my case a little bit, just tongue-in-cheek a little bit, but I think the only block to treatment in health is actually your willingness to give up the anger.
Wow.
Because anger is such a powerful emotion. So remember, there's a genealogy of anger where you have a circumstance that you blame, then you're a victim, then you're angry. The circumstance can be perceived, somebody hurt your feelings or whatever, or it can be real, like being in chronic pain or being assaulted. The problem is, the more legitimate your anger, the harder it is to let go. And so whether it's perceived anger or real anger, it's the same end result of an adrenalized nervous system.
Okay, so let's give an example. Let's say, a kid, their parents abandoned them and they're angry about it. So they have a real reason to be angry. But I always have come from the belief through my, spiritual evolution, that we all have a choice. And certainly in my practice, I see people in the same situation that choose the opposite. So I do believe that we have a choice to be angry or not. But those people that choose to express with anger and remain angry for many years will tell you that it's not their fault, that this person did this to them, they abandoned them, they did whatever it was to them, and they're angry and they have a right to be angry. But what you're saying is, even if that's the case, the result is the same.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
And being in pain, of course, is a legitimate reason to be angry. Being angry at the doctor who did the wrong surgery or the person who hit you. I mean, I'll never forget a woman I met many years ago in the office who had a pelvic fracture. She had chronic pain, and I did not understand chronic pain at the time. But she was so angry. And again, I just caught my attention. I just remember this conversation really well. She had a broken femur, broken pelvis, and it had healed. She didn't have an obvious reason for the chronic pain. The problem was that she was hit head on by a semi truck, and the truck driver was drunk, and she was not letting that one go. I mean, she had a right to be angry, right?
Right.
But she was the one that was still suffering. So what you're doing when you remain angry is that you're now giving control of your life to a person that you dislike.
Interesting.
What also caught my attention with Dr. Luskin out of Stanford is that he's lectured all over the world on forgiveness. And what he did 4 major research projects. 2 of those research projects were with the parents of children who had been murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty intense. And obviously, his point was that forgiveness is actually a selfish act. You're now, so what you've done, you've now given your entire quality of life up to these murderers. Doesn't mean they shouldn't go to the gas chamber. Doesn't mean that they shouldn't be punished. Doesn't mean that you have to like them. But what you're doing, forgiveness is actually a selfish act. You get your life back.
And forgiveness is really such a hard thing, though. I don't even know if it's just hard to do, but it's hard to know if you've really done it, I think, because you want to forgive someone, let's say. But as you say, let's say like a child, now they're 40 years old and they come and they tell you they were raped every day for 11 years by their dad or something. Okay, they can forgive them. They don't need to have a relationship with them. They don't even need to speak to them, like you said, or their kid could have been murdered and they can still hope the guy goes to jail or whatever. But at the same time, it's hard to learn to forgive and still like not speak to somebody. There's like this thing for me that always wonders, like, have we truly forgiven? Like, what's the sign that we've truly forgiven? And if you have pain and maybe the pain's gone, that's a great sign. But what if you don't? I mean, forgiveness is a really tough thing, I think.
Well, a couple things. And Fred Luskin and I have done several seminars together back in New York, and he's just been brilliant on this. But the last one he gave, he pointed out some things that I thought were important. So remember, the pathways are permanent, okay? Number one. Second of all, anger is so powerful, and being a victim is so powerful, you are never going to wake up one morning and say, I want to give this up. I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I can find ways of going into the victim mode pretty much every day. 3 to 5 times at least every day I go into the victim mode. So his other point is that it's a process. In other words, every time you think about this person who murdered your child, it's actually important not to suppress that anger reaction. Because again, suppressing thoughts and emotions has been documented to damage the hippocampus of the brain, which again is the short-term and long-term memory center. So one of the core principles of healing is learning to be comfortable with uncomfortable emotions, because as you fight them and try to solve them, again, they're a million times stronger than the conscious brain. So if you are doing battle with these things, you're actually giving them neurological attention and you're reinforcing them. So it's fine to have anger come up and arise. I went through a phase about 3 years ago where I put the label on myself of being enlightened, and my wife wanted to kill me. And it's just a label. And I honestly thought I knew so much about forgiveness and victimhood and all this sort of stuff. And I teach it a course that I was really above going into the victim mode, and that just isn't true. We are victims every day. I have to drive the speed limit when I really want to go 10 miles an hour faster. I can't do that. I want to play golf, like I told you before, and I really can't play golf. I'm trying. So I used to get upset about it and frustrated. And so there's just endless number of things that cause frustration, and it's a powerful feeling. And when you feel helpless, what else do you do? So you're going to have an anger response the rest of your life, and that anger will come up over and over again with that person who did you wrong. It's just the way it is. So, but what happens as you do the tools of just your mindfulness, relaxation, the writing exercises, etc., it's just a learned skill to actually substitute a different response. In other words, instead of being stress automatic response, remember, stress is a threat. So by definition, your automatic survival response is always going to be adrenaline. So, and it happens in a millisecond. So what happens with the writing exercises is that you're creating a little bit of a space between the stress and the response. So instead of being stress automatic survival adrenaline response, is stress choice of response. Then as you become aware of what the automatic response is doing to you, then you start substituting. So you realize that this response is not very helpful, and you're simply substitute a different response. And with repetition, your brain actually starts to physically change. You're actually starting to change the physical structure of your brain. So now documented in neuroscience research that in chronic pain, your brain becomes cross-wired, and with repetition and reprogramming, you literally can change the response to your brain, and you physically change the structure of your brain.
So are you undoing those pain pathways ever, or are you just kind of finding a way around them?
Well, I think there's three aspects of healing. One of them is simply decreasing the body's adrenaline. The second one is based on neuroplasticity, where you are creating new pathways around the old pathways. And what the writing does, of course, you're connecting thoughts with physical sensations. That's creating a new pathway. So there's a bunch of ways of creating new pathways, but writing is one of those. Then the third way is simply shifting from pain pathways to non-pain pathways. And one thing I ask my patients to do, and it's also in the book, is just on the way home, think of a time of your life that was just flat out enjoyable. Just what was your best time of your life, and spend an hour just talking about it, reminiscing, conversations, thoughts, dreams, whatever they were. And that part of your brain is there. You don't have to make that up. So in my own journey about 5 years ago, I was trying to figure out what the next step might be in my own particular process. And I realized that pain pathways are permanent, but so are play pathways. You don't have to make those up. So the fastest way of actually coming out of pain pathways is actually reconnecting with play pathways. It's not a good starting point because it really sort of, people feel like their pain is being dishonored. So, chronic pain is a horrible experience. I mean, you're in an abyss, nobody believes you, nobody can find anything wrong, and it's just sort of a disaster. And that's a whole different topic, but the problem is the fastest way actually coming out of the pain pathways is reconnecting to the best part of who you are. So when I talk about the book, say, look, this book is not a formula. Basically, it's a framework to organize your thinking, but it allows you to reconnect with your own body's potential to heal. You basically heal yourself. And there's a bunch of ways of doing that, and there's not one specific way for a given person. So the sequence of people that get better is simply understanding chronic pain, in other words, creating an awareness. The second step is treating every aspect at the same time. So things like sleep, stress, physical conditioning, diet, nutrition, medication management, all those things count, but not one of them by themselves is going to solve the problem. Then the third part is taking control of your own care. So, so becoming aware, treating every aspect at the same time, and taking control is the basic structure of how this process works.
And taking control, would that be where the writing comes in?
Yeah, the work is not hard. I mean, you can read. The reason I put the website together and created these stages is that people, of course, read the book and nothing would happen, right? It's just a book. So by actually connecting and engaging in tools that, again, calm down the nervous system and work on neuroplasticity, that's when things start to change. So I would like to talk about the writing exercise just for a second. And what I did in the book is put together 4 stages. And when a patient comes in and say, look, just stop. And when I was going through my chronic pain process, I became an epiphany addict. I was always looking for that one solution to solve the problem. And one of the things I did, I was actually in psychotherapy for 13 solid years. And what I didn't realize is that by talking about these pathways, I actually reinforced them. So I'm a fan of psychotherapy, but you have to combine it with the other tools. So what happens is I say, look, just stop, take a break. And there's 5 steps in stage 1. And one of them is to learn about pain, which sort of comes about as you go through the process. But I say, look, step 2 is called expressive writing. And simply write down your thoughts and you tear them up. And at the time that I wrote the first book, I didn't realize the research was so deep. But it turns out there's over 300 research papers that says it works. And you simply write down your thoughts and you tear them up. Now, people say, what do I want to tear them up? And I say, look, this is for 2 reasons that I'm having you tear these things up. One of them is to write with freedom. So the thoughts can be rational or irrational. They can be positive or negative. It doesn't matter what they are because they're just thoughts. So remember, humans have a problem that you cannot escape your thoughts, right? So you have this progressively adrenalized nervous system as you get older. There's something about the writing that starts breaking up these circuits. So again, when you write and tear them up, you can write with freedom. But the second reason, which I think is more important, is that you don't want to analyze them. Because where's your attention?
Yeah. So you're saying putting the attention on the pain, or even doing psychotherapy, speaking constantly about your pain or your state or whatever it is, you're just giving more energy to the actual thing you're trying to get rid of.
Right. So again, it's not psychological. Your brain will simply develop wherever you place its attention. So to me, so as far as reprogram the brain is based on the concept of awareness, separation, and redirecting. So basically, the brain creates awareness of the thoughts. You've now separated. That space, the thoughts are on the table. You're a little bit of a distance away. That space is now connected with vision and feel, which is part of the unconscious part of the brain. And you've connected thoughts with physical sensations. So that's my orthopedic explanation of the neuroscience behind it. Nobody really knows why this works. Then the third part of reprogramming can be visualization, meditation, relaxation, acupuncture. All the things that you talk about come to life when you can simply separate first. So if you're meditating to fight these circuits, you're going to lose because the circuits are so strong that you'll eventually get worn out. So it turns out that meditation is actually one of the go-to eventual things you do every day. But again, it's in a different energy than simply trying to combat the circuits. So again, once you separate, then you can redirect any place you want.
Time for your break, and while you do that, use that Amazon banner on my site and go buy Dr. Hanscom's book right now. Remember, it's called Back in Control. If you struggle with any kind of anxiety or anger issues or pain, it will be a miracle book for you, so go buy it. And thanks to all of you out there that are using that banner for your Amazon shopping needs. I so appreciate that, and it's a great way to help me and to support the show, so thank you very much. Please remember to pass this episode on to anyone that you think it can help. If you're listening from the podcast app, you just hit that share button. You can share it right from there. If not, just send them to iTunes or to vidalspeaks.com and they can listen from there. And if you haven't subscribed to the show yet, you guys, please do so. You know I'd appreciate that as much as I'd appreciate any review also. I love all you guys, and I know you're doing all you can to help spread the word, so I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Okay, now let's get back to the show. Yeah, so the writing is a way to kind of help around those, get the thoughts out so that you're not just feeding them energy, get them out, and tearing them up, I imagine, has a way to permanently feel like you're getting rid of them or like putting them somewhere else other than in your head or in your mind or in your unconscious. And so the writing of that down is in a way reprogramming these kind of new pathways around the pain pathways. Is that right?
I think so. I don't think we really know for sure, but to me, it's just simply a separation process. You realize that these thoughts are just thoughts. So the problem is that, again, humans cannot escape their thoughts. So thoughts are real because they create real chemical reactions. So obviously the thoughts they are very real thoughts. But as you well know, thoughts are not necessarily your reality, right?
Yes, true. That's
a huge difference, right? So we get these repetitive thoughts that seem like our story, and we create our identities around it. And one person I received a tremendous amount of benefit from, and I'm not particularly a religious person, although I respect a religious perspective, is there's a book called The Way to Love by Anthony DeMello. And he's a Jesuit priest who died in the late 1980s and one of the most brilliant thinkers of all time. It's a little book that's 2 inches by 2 inches that one of my colleagues turned me on to. And his solution is just simply awareness. Just become aware of what this reaction is doing. He's very clear about anger being my responsibility, not the person who precipitated it. In fact, he actually counsels you to thank your enemies because they are the true window into your own soul. So that book has been remarkably clear as far as taking full responsibility, becoming aware. And his proposed solution is simply awareness, which for me right now has become a huge factor. I don't think it's the best starting point. It's a little hard to deal with that. I think the writing is what I call mechanical meditation, whereas you well know meditation, you become aware of the thoughts, you watch them pass through, and then you move on, right? So a skilled meditator can do this, but the problem is when you're in chronic pain and desperate, I tried meditation as the primary go-to tool, and I just couldn't do it. It was just too intense of an experience to try to escape from. So I call the writing mechanical meditation because it creates an awareness and separation in one move. And then I combine that with step 3 on my website, which I call active meditation, which is an abbreviated form of mindfulness, where you simply put your brain on a different sensation. So as you're sitting in your chair, just feel the back of your chair for a second, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And what you've done is simply switch sensory input. So you've gone from thoughts or pain to a different sensation. And so the writing is maybe once or twice a day for 5, 10, 15 minutes. And then the active meditation is as many times a day as you can think of doing it. And it both de-adrenalizes the nervous system and also switches sensory input. And I probably accomplish it maybe 20 to 30 times a day. I'd like to do it more. It's one of my personal goals right now is actually work on tasting my food, feeling the breeze, feeling the steering wheel. I will say that during surgery, I think I talked about this earlier, I have this golf coach, David Alamy, who has taught me athletic performance principles in surgery. And basically what you're doing, we do active meditation all day long or mindfulness-based surgery. And when we become anxious or frustrated, instead of going focus, 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 we actually just go to feel. So I just have my fellows and myself drop my shoulders, and then we lightly touch the instruments. Then the next move is made with the whole upper body. So in other words, we've connected to the move. Mm-hmm. And so my complication rates probably drop 80%. Wow, my fellows go out into practice with just a fraction of the complications I had in my first 5 years in practice. And it's been a remarkable experience for me, going from becoming somewhat defensive as a surgeon to just absolutely enjoying it.
Well, that's something we need to do a whole show on, because mindfulness is just such an incredible thing, and we take it all for granted. But I want to ask you something about the writing thing. So, in that moment when the person sits down to write, you're saying write what's ever on their mind. But, there's a lot of people who, like you, had maybe some abusive or horrible childhoods, and they have a lot of deep-seated anger that really, maybe it's just totally repressed, but for sure it's suppressed. Or maybe they even think they healed themselves from it because they did 10 years of therapy or whatever, and they're not even aware of it. But I believe it's possible that anger at their parents or their childhood or whatever it was that's deep-seated from a long time ago could be the cause of what their pain is that day, that when they're sitting there. So if they're not in touch with that anger, could they still get better from writing, even if they're writing about things of their daily frustrations, about traffic or their job or their spouses or their kids or whatever? Do they still have a way to get better if they're not in touch with that?
Well, I'm going to say two things at once here. This is a little tricky. And this is the easiest and hardest part of the whole project, is that they're just thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. And the metaphor I use is like unhooking from a train. So I wrote a little website post called Unhooking from the Train. So if you just visualize yourself as the engineer of a very long train with the cars representing the baggage from the past, what you're simply doing with the writing is simply unhooking from the train. So you start moving forward with your day without the cars behind you. You just let go. And so the past is done, is permanent. The links to the past are there, they are permanent. You can't fix those or solve those. They're just not solvable. So I wrote another website post called Solving the Unsolvable. And again, the unconscious brain is so much stronger than the conscious brain, you have no chance. So what happens is that as you unhook and move forward, you have so much more energy to move forward and engage with your life. As you use these pathways less, they simply atrophy. So like, for instance, I played trumpet in high school, not that well, but pretty well. And I can't play it anymore, but I could reconnect with those pathways relatively quickly. Just like with your golf game, why you could, if you hadn't played for a year, you can simply go back and play a lot more quickly than I could ever play, right? So those pathways are permanent. So same thing with those abusive past, that's not going away. There's nothing you can do. Nothing. And that's the hardest. So, but what's fascinating is that once people really truly understand they can't fix this, we spend so much energy trying to cope with the past, trying to fix the past, trying to solve it. The energy release going forward is stunning. I mean, I probably have triple the energy I had in high school just to get through my day. I just don't get worn out anymore. Now, I get physically worn out, but I don't emotionally get worn out anymore.
So are you saying that it doesn't matter if they write anything down, even though they're maybe really angry about their childhood? If that thought's not coming to them today, then it wouldn't go down on the paper, but they could still just write whatever is on their mind, and eventually they'll just detach from that and let it go?
Right. So I keep emphasizing that they're just thoughts. And I say, look, writing is simply not the solution. It's just the foundation. It's just that step of awareness and separation. And then, just sit back in your chair for a second with me and just feel back at the chair and enjoy this conversation. So as you and I both know, the only reality that there is right this second, in spite of our past, is you and I sitting here talking with each other. That's it, right?
Right.
So in an odd way, and this is what makes patients a little crazy, so look, there is no goal to this project, right? I mean, you can do endless number of steps, and you'll be better skilled in a year than you are right this second. But I got really pulled into this about 6 years ago, where I just was going step after step after step and trying to monitor my progress and trying to get better, etc. And I was doing fine, but it was also an endless, tedious process. So another metaphor I use, if you just visualize yourself climbing this huge mountain, and at the top of this mountain, there's a better you. But as we well know, there's no top to this mountain, right? So it takes a lot of work and energy to try to create this better person, and it's not there. So what the process is really doing is, if you visualize a bunch of balloons tied to a railing, what you're doing is you're cutting strings, and eventually you just take off, and you just are. You can just be. And so there's no energy floating around in the air, and you get to experience your life. You become aware. It becomes endlessly more interesting to just become aware of everything, other people's attitudes, their conversations, your environment. That's much more enjoyable than projecting your view of the world onto everything and everybody. It's a completely different process. So for me, it's a completely different world, because I was so right and opinionated about everything. It was unbelievable. And, not that I'm aware all the time, but it's just, that's a learned skill too. Anyway, getting back to the first point is that the goal, if you want to call it, is connecting to this very second that we're in. When your brain is on sensory input, mindfulness, if you want to call it that, you're in the present moment, because your brain's not on the other anxiety-producing pathways.
Right. So the more you're not in this very moment saying, I feel my thighs touching the chair and my back touching the chair, or this steering wheel, or I'm aware of this in the very moment. When you're not in that, you're in some place that's just thoughts that are just a thought that you want to let go and just keep trying to be aware of being in the present moment, because the more you are, then you work around those pain pathways because you're creating new, stronger pathways that work around them. But if not, nonetheless, you're not acting from the pain pathways because you're not there.
Right. Yeah. So in a way, the process is incredibly simple. So I have 4 stages. And the first stage is the foundation. So I combine the writing with the active meditation. The second stage is combining forgiveness with play, because with forgiveness, you have to become aware of what's causing the anger. And with forgiveness, you're separating. And then play, of course, is a very strong, powerful reprogramming tool. So it's a more complex awareness, separation, and reprogramming. Third stage is sort of an organizational phase, and we start having people concentrate more on the family issues, but also writing a business plan for themselves and actually really moving forward with or without their pain. Then the final stage is, I call it the spiritual journey, getting your perspective back, whereas the ultimate shift away from pain pathways is actually giving back, contributing, sense of purpose, etc. I define the spiritual journey as good food, good wine, good friends, religious experience if you wish. Whatever way you want to define it is fine, but people in chronic pain get sucked into a very deep, dark hole, and they lose that perspective. So that's the ultimate shift, by the way, off the pain pathways is getting that perspective back.
Yeah, and people in chronic pain, their mind is on their pain. It's hard to escape the pain. Pain, as you know, and I know, living with 43 years of migraines, pain is suicidal. So pain wants you to leave, and it's easier to think about leaving than to stay because pain is so horrible. But the more that you think about that pain, then the more you're stuck in that pathway, and the more you alienate yourself from everyone else because they don't want to hear it, or they can't handle it, or you don't feel in the mood to socialize with them, and so you're just becoming more and more isolated, which puts you more and more into thinking about your pain. It's such a vicious cycle.
Right. No, that's absolutely correct. Actually, the fifth step on my first stage is simply, I did not realize how much people talked about their pain. And I say, look, when you walk out this door of my office, you are never to talk about your pain to anybody ever again. Because it just reinforces the pathways, right? And you're absolutely right. It's not that interesting. It drives people away. You become more and more isolated. So you have more time to think about the pain, right? Mm-hmm. So people don't know what to do with that. I had no idea. I did a seminar with Dr. Luskin, myself, and my wife and my stepdaughter for 3 years back in New York at the Omega Institute. And in 5 days, we had 80% of our people going to pain-free. It was remarkable. And it was based on awareness, hope, forgiveness, and play. But one of the basic ground rules was that people simply could not talk about their pain and they could not complain, period. And people were blown away. They did not know what to do with that. And so it turns out to be one of the more powerful tools is simply stop. There's nothing to be gained about talking about your pain. You are right. It's not that interesting. It's tedious. And it absolutely reinforces the circuits. And it's interesting, for the first day or two, people did not know what to do. But by Wednesday, Thursday that week, we had participant after participant going absolutely pain-free and staying that way. It was a remarkable experience. We're actually doing Omega again this year, just a shortened version of the workshop from July 7th through 9th. Are you familiar with Dr. Bernie Siegel by chance?
Yes, of course.
So he's one of my co-presenters. So it's going to be Bernie Siegel, myself, my stepdaughter Jazz, and my wife Babs. And they come in because they're both performance artists. My wife's a professional tap dancer, and my daughter's a somatic expressive arts therapist. And it's a combination of a structure people share. And we finally realized over the last few years of doing the workshop is that I didn't do anything. We just created a structure where people could start talking to each other and interacting and relaxing, and they felt safe. As they felt safe and started interacting with other people, there was this massive shift off the pain pathways and you're just getting back into life. And it was unbelievable. I had no idea that was possible. And so we learned a lot. We learned a lot from that workshop.
I imagine you come across so many patients in your practice every day that you tell this to when you tell them to start writing down. I've heard on a show before one of your patients, the guy that had the complete spinal fusion, that the doctor wanted to redo his entire spinal fusion. He was in that horrible horse accident. I heard that show, and I was just like, if I were that guy, my gosh, he's got this serious medical complete fusion, and he's in suicidal pain, and he goes to this guy that wants to redo it, and then you tell him, no, your fusion looks perfect. Go back to your hotel and write 15 minutes tonight. And he was already, I think, 80% out of pain. But I think you must come across like people going, that won't work for me. But that guy was seriously in pain. So that's what's so convincing about it. But I think when you put it in an organizational way, because that's what people need. Sometimes, like you said in your email to me, that you can only absorb so much because you have to kind of be given instructions and some kind of organized thing. Do A, B, C, D, and then people feel like they have a better grip on what they can do, because part of it is just a process that'll happen once they begin the steps.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, Mark Owens is the gentleman who you're talking about, and he's actually become a good friend of mine. We just talked to him this last weekend, and 3 years later, he's riding up at 4,000 foot elevation in 2 feet of snow, hauling a pack horse around. He has no pain. And he went from 9 years of extreme pain. He had high dose narcotics, and he's a PhD scientist. He spent 23 years in Africa saving elephants and lions. He only left Africa after his third assassination attempt. And so this is one of the toughest human beings I know. And he was ready to go through 10 hours of surgery. And there is nobody more cynical on this planet than Mark when I told him to go home and start writing. He just said, this is crazy. And I have to tell you is that I'm a major spine surgeon. I'm Seattle's senior spine surgeon. I do the most complex cases that exist. And so I feel silly, coming to my office for this big operation, I tell you to go home and write. I mean, I have to tell you, even myself personally, after all these years, it feels a little silly to me. But I will tell you, on that second visit, I can tell within 10 seconds whether somebody started to write or not. There's just a shift that I can't explain. And I'll ask the question, and I already know the answer before they give it to me. And of course, they come up with 10 excuses why they can't write, et cetera, et cetera. And I say, fine. So I'll see you back in 2 weeks. Because I can't really do anything until the writing starts. Again, the writing is not the solution. It is simply a foundational where it does awareness and separation in one step. If you start to obsessively write to solve your pain, that actually doesn't work. You're just simply separating from your thoughts, but you have to calm down the nervous system with one of these other tools like visualization or mindfulness and meditation. You have to combine it with other tools. You can't do it by itself.
So it's the writing and the mindfulness that
Correct.
The mindfulness calms down the meditation, and the writing kind of lets go of your thoughts.
Right. Well, it gives you that space between the stimulus and the response. And you probably know this better than I do, but all the masters talk about a little bit of a space in your brain to actually see what's going on. And that's what the writing does. It creates that space. It's sort of funny. My wife and I both write. My son, daughter, daughter-in-law, our whole family now writes. And many of my friends' families write. And my wife can tell within a week when I quit writing. And she goes, well, honey, have you done your writing today? Because I get snappy. I get a little bit more anxious, a little bit more reactive. And it's not subtle. If I quit writing, in about 2 or 3 weeks, these little skin rashes start popping up on my wrist. My sleep goes sour. My anxiety goes up. My feet start to burn.
Wow.
And it's about 2 or 3 weeks consistently when I quit doing the writing that these symptoms start coming back.
Interesting. And so when you're writing, you're just writing. Is it always needing to be pen and paper? Can you type?
I don't know the answer to that. I know the research shows that when you write, it's a very complex task converting thoughts into manual writing. If you think about this way, you've got, it doesn't have to be legible. I mean, none of my writing is legible, and it can be just 3 to 5 minutes. I do my writing, even 30 seconds of writing is better than none. I encourage people not to overwrite, because that's a form of control in a way. In other words, you're going to really solve these thoughts. Remember, there's trillions of thoughts in your brain. You're not going to solve that one either, right? So it's simply 5 to 10 minutes. And I will say, when I first started the process, when I was in deep trouble, I would write for hours at a time. And it was huge. It was a big deal. But long term, after 15 years of doing this, 5 or 10 minutes a day makes a huge difference. And it's just once or twice a day.
So that's the good starting amount, is 5 to 10 minutes. Now, I know you have to go because you have another appointment, and I look so forward to having you back because we have a lot of things to talk about if you're willing to come back on. I'd love to get deeper into your work with forgiveness and anger and anxiety, and each time, of course, we talk about the prescription for getting over all these things, but so many of these things are so big. I wanted to use today's show to kind of just generally explain the concept, and then we'll come back and talk together more about these emotions like anger, anxiety, perfectionism, all this kind of stuff I know you write about a lot on. So I just want to really say thank you. And it's been so great to see and read your work and your book and just see what you're doing for people, because in my practice, that is a growing field of just how many people out there, millions and millions, have chronic pain. So I so appreciate the work you're doing and just want to say thank you. And also, before you go, I just want you to give 3 tips of just like how should someone just start? What should they do? Just 3 little tips, like what should they do?
Well, I tell my patients, just jump to the website. It's backincontrol.com and just start out with homework. So first step is simply stop looking for an answer. Just take a break. Second of all is simply learn about chronic pain, which is on stage 1 of the website. And the third one is start the writing. Just start to write. And you don't have to learn the whole process. Even if you never read my book and simply did only the writing combined with relaxation, that would have a huge effect. That is the biggest starting point. It's just those two combined together. It's the writing combined with the meditation. And then you'll learn this process as you go. You'll have a different interpretation of it than the next person. But just start that part of the process. And then I keep telling people, look, you cannot fix yourself. You can only become an observer of your own healing. So once you start the somatic type tools, the writing relaxation tools, you'll become an observer of your own healing. It's very interesting. And consistent, by the way. I mean, probably 9% of people that engage in this process eventually go to pain-free, usually in about 3 to 6 months.
Awesome. And your website is backincontrol.com, and your book is Back in Control. And I'm going to do all your bio and stuff on the show So no worries about that. Do you have a Facebook, Twitter? Do you do any social media stuff?
I do have Dr. David Hanscom. The Facebook is back in control, and I don't do the Twitter. I also write a new website post every week on the website, so it's continually being updated.
Great. Well, that means we'll have lots more to talk about. I didn't even get to ask you about your golf, but we'll do that too.
That's a different story. So no, I appreciate this very much. I'm excited you're excited, and of course, I had such a tough experience. I'm really happy to give it back any way I can.
Yeah, they say you reap 1,000 times by giving back, right? It's so true. So thank you so much for being here today, and good luck on your next call, and we'll be talking soon.
Sounds good.
What an amazing man Dr. Hanscom is. Can you imagine how many people this could help if they could be open-minded enough to try it and give it a little time? I know it's really hard to believe, even after hearing him, but there are many other people doing similar things. I used to listen to Dr. John Sarno, who gave up doing back surgeries because he realized it was more about stuck emotions. So it's kind of similar, but this seems a lot easier to do than anything else that I've come across, other than the tapping thing. And in that last episode with Jessica Ortner, where she talked about tapping, you can see it's very similar because it's a way to trigger the nervous system to release emotions. So you can now understand that this nervous system can be so affected by suppressed emotions or just emotions that we don't even realize that are way under there. So try to have an open mind, and it doesn't have to make sense. Remember that. You just need an open mind, and you need to give it a try, because certain things, they're based on the principle of energy. They're not just easy to explain like medicine wants them to be. As a homeopath, I understand the power of energy. So just read this book with an open mind and begin writing and tearing it up and see what happens. What do you have to lose? Maybe your drugs and some feelings of frustration, anxiety, and anger, but those would be good to lose, right? Okay, well, I think I've talked enough for today, so I hope you guys enjoyed the show today. I thought it was a great show. I look forward to having Dr. Hanscom back as a repeated guest because he has so many cool subjects to talk about. We're going to go deeper into anxiety, deeper into anger, and also about how families suffer when they live with someone in the household with chronic pain. That's where he's been doing a lot of his latest work, so I really look forward to more shows with him. But for now, you know what time it is, right? Yes, it's time to say goodbye. Until next week, be well, write and tear it up. Vidal has spoken. Remember, you heal with a plant-powered diet, homeopathy, and detoxing, of course. Peace, be healthy, be free, live life.